What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, I'm going to talk about the wildcard, why you might want to use it in Game Week 30 instead of Game Week 31, what the draft might look like if you've got your free hit and your bench boost left, and then I'm going to go through a couple of drafts if you've only got your bench boost. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and let's get into it. So just before I get into the draft, I want to go through some quick thoughts on wildcard 30 versus 31, because I've had a lot of questions about this already during the international break. Ultimately, the decision is going to come down to how much you like your current squad in Game Week 30, because a wildcard 30 or a wildcard 31 draft aren't going to look really too dissimilar. Obviously, in Game Week 31, it might be slightly different if there's a bunch of injuries that happen in Game Week 30. But if I was to build a draft right now for both of those weeks, it'd look almost identical. So it really comes down to how much you like your squad and how that looks for Game Week 30. If you're looking at your current team and you hate it, there's probably more reason to wildcard. You can also move early on getting Liverpool players and stuff like that. But there are some advantages for waiting until Game Week 31. So you get to hold Watkins for Wolves at home, who I think, by the way, I'm just going to double check this. Yeah, Watkins is the highest scoring player in the game right now, and most people are going to get rid of him on wildcard. So going in 31 means you at least get to keep him for Wolves at home in Game Week 30. The reason that a lot of people are going to sell him, despite how well he's done, is it's Man City away in 31, it's Arsenal away in Game Week 33, and there's no more double game weeks to come. This could be an absolute disaster getting rid of him, but I think a lot of people are going to do it. You also get to hold 3 Spurs players for Luton at home. Now, on wildcard, you might still go for 3 Spurs players. It's definitely an option, but not a guarantee. But if you've already got them, and you're going to go down to just 2, or even 1 Spurs player later on, you might want to delay the wildcard. You can ignore Arsenal versus Man City away. Depending on your chip strategy, you're probably going to want Arsenal players at some point, but you don't necessarily need them in Game Week 30, so you could delay that. You can monitor the Darwin yellow card situation. I was talking to Praz about this on Twitter. Darwin's on 8 yellow cards. If he gets 2 more over the next 4 matches, it's a 2-game suspension. Now, the chances of that happening hopefully are quite low, but if he picks up another one in Game Week 30, all of a sudden he's a massive risk for the double game week, and you might want a wild card without him instead. And you can also see the Newcastle defence set up because Botman is injured. Presumably Lascelles will just come in as he did before and play every single game. But I guess there is a chance that Eddie Howe goes for something different, so you could just delay that decision. It's not like Newcastle defenders are an absolute must to get in. But ultimately, if you're looking at your team right now and you hate it, and you want to go early on Liverpool players and stuff like that, you should probably just wildcard in Game Week 30 because there's not going to be a huge amount of difference between the drafts. Just a couple of other thoughts on the wildcard draft in general. I'll talk through this as I go through the one that I've come up with. One of the key dilemmas, I would say, for people who are wildcarding now, is how many Arsenal and Liverpool players to go for if you're free hitting in Game Week 34. Because obviously on your free hit, you can just triple up on Liverpool and Arsenal players, so there's less need to have them in your actual team because you know you're going to be able to get them in later. But they do have good fixtures before the double. So obviously Man City away for Arsenal is not great, but then it's Luton at home, Brighton away, Villa at home, especially good for an attacker, I would say. And then for Liverpool, as we know, it's Brighton at home this week, Sheffield United at home in 31, Man United away in 32, and Palace at home in 33. So the 4 game weeks before the double, you've got 3 home games, and they're all pretty good. Now, the reason I say it's a key dilemma is because none of Arsenal or Liverpool will double after Game Week 34. And if you're looking to free hit and then bench boost in 37, the more Arsenal and Liverpool players you've got, the more you're going to have to probably transfer out later on. Now, it's not like those 2 teams have got terrible fixtures after Game Week 34, but if you're trying to get as close to 15 double game week players as possible, the more you've got, the more transfers. But obviously, the fewer you go for now, the less players you've got for those good fixtures before Game Week 34. So I think how many Arsenal or Liverpool players is going to be an important decision if you're wildcarding this week. And, I mean, this always goes without saying, but maybe it's more relevant right now. If you're buying players now that you want on the bench boost in Game Week 37, which is quite far away, try and pick the nailed ones if possible. Like for Brighton defenders, for example, I've got Van Heck on this draft because of money reasons. But if you could afford Lewis Dunk instead, he's much more likely to keep his place later on. For what it's worth, right, that's maybe a bad example because Van Hekke has played so many 90-minute games now. But if I asked you who was nailed on out of the two, you'd say definitely Lewis Dunk, probably Van Hekke. And the more decisions you go for with those kind of options where you take the one that's maybe not quite as nailed, the potential more issues you have later on. I don't think it's going to be a huge thing to worry about because most of the players you're going for are probably going to be nailed. At least they look it right now, depending on, you know, how far through the cup they get, European matches and stuff like that. But it's just worth thinking about. So I would probably go in game week 30 and get more of the Liverpool players and just hope that Ollie Watkins doesn't go mad against Wolves at home. But it's not a necessity. You could wait until 31 if you wanted to. Either way, let's look at the draft. So this first draft I'm going to talk about is based on someone that's wildcarding this week using their free hit in game week 34 and bench boosting in game week 37. I know not everyone wildcarding this week is going to be on that strategy, but I think that will be the most popular one. I've then got a couple of drafts to look at afterwards for people that don't have their free hit. Just quickly, some people are going to ask me, what about wildcard now, bench boost in 34 and free hit in 37? And in theory, I quite like that because the sooner you bench boost after a wildcard, the better. And obviously, if you free hit in 37, you can just manage any rotation that's happening at the time and just get 11 double game week players in. The problem with that strategy is Spurs. Because they're blanking in game week 34, you can't have any of their players for the bench boost in game week 34 because obviously they've got no fixture. But then they're going to double 2 more times afterwards. So it's just quite a lot of transfers to manage. So that's why I don't think wildcard 30, bench boost 34 and free hit 37 works that well. Anyway, back to this draft. Forget everything I just said about buying nailed on players because there's already some concerns with this. And I think that's part of the problem of wildcarding now and making decisions for a bench boost later on. But Chelsea players have got decent fixtures at the moment, like Burnley at home in game week 30. Right up until 34, the fixtures are good. And obviously, they got a couple of doubles afterwards. They need to be part of your decisions that you're making this week. So I've gone for Petrovic in goal. And look, he is first choice at the moment. That's clear. But could Sanchez get minutes at some point? Possibly, right? I'm certainly not ruling it out. And I've also got Gusto, who is fine as long as Reece James isn't back. Now, I know everyone will say, well, even when Reece James comes back, he'll get injured again. But he could take minutes off Gusto before the end of the season. So those two picks aren't perfect. But I think with the fixtures they've got, including the 2 double game weeks to come later on, I think you've probably got to go for them. So it's Burnley at home, Man United at home, Sheffield United away, and Everton at home up until 34. You then free hit them out for Arsenal away. And then you've got Villa away, West Ham at home, Forest away, and Bournemouth at home to the end of the season, plus 2 double game weeks in there as well. And the extra fixtures are Spurs at home and Brighton away. I just think with Chelsea, it's quite difficult to go for 2 of the attackers. Obviously, Palmer will be in everyone's team. But if you wanted to go for like Nicholas Jackson, I think he's even worse than Darwin Nunez. He's on 9 yellow cards. So 1 more and he's going to get suspended for 2 games. So he's just too much of a risk. So that's why I've gone for those 2 in defence. I've also got Lascelles because I'm pretty confident he's just going to come in and be the centre-back while Botman is out. And Botman's out for ages, like 6 to 9 months. That's what happened last time. I've seen some people speculate that, you know, Dan Burn could go and play centre-back and Lewis Hall could come in and play left-back or something like that, or even Livramento. I just don't see it, right? That's not what happened last time. And I think Lascelles did well. So I think that will be his place, but it's not a complete certainty. So there maybe is some risk there. I think essentially, if you've got more money than me, you could go for like Fabian Schär instead. Or obviously Trippier if you've got a lot more money. Just double checking Trippier now, actually. Yeah, he's still flagged with a calf injury. So I think if he is out still, then Livramento is going to play right back. I think there's less chance Lewis Hall plays left back. I think Dan Burn will just stay there. But obviously when Trippier is back, there is a possibility of that happening. But he's not someone I would put on wildcard anyway, Trippier. He's just too expensive at 6.7 million with the double not until game week 37. So I would probably just save the money and go for Lascelles. And then it's a similar conversation with Udogie versus Porro. I would definitely want a Spurs defender because the fixtures are good before 34. You're going to free hit them out in the blank, and then they got 2 doubles later on. And Udogie is just cheaper. If you're flush with funds and you got a lot of money in the bank, of course, buy Pedro Porro instead. I still think he's more attacking, but the price difference is quite a lot between them. So that's why I've gone for Udogie. And again, just quickly to look at the Spurs fixtures: Luton at home, West Ham away, Forest at home, Newcastle away. If you needed to, you could play Doggy every one of those, and then you free hit him out in 34. Spurs do have Arsenal at home and Liverpool away in 35 and 36, which is not ideal, but one of those 2 game weeks is probably going to be a double game week for Spurs. And then you've got good fixtures afterwards, which is Burnley at home in 37, and that will also be with a double game week too, and then Sheffield United away in game week 38. Again, it could be a triple game week in 37, but it's more likely it goes into game week 36. So that's the defenders I've got playing in game week 30. The fixtures are all pretty good. On the bench, I've got Van Heck, Liverpool away, very cheap defender for Brighton. And if I just go back to the FPL screen here, he has played 90 minutes every single game since game week 11. If we can't consider him nailed on at this point, then I'm not sure what counts really. Again, I would put Lewis Dunk slightly ahead of him, right? Of course. But with that many 90 minutes since game week 11, you'd be a bit unlucky to suddenly lose him. But it's always possible, I think, with De Zerbi. But he's only 4.1 million, whereas Lewis Dunk is 5.2. So again, it's about saving that money so you can afford the rest of the team. And then I've got Gabriel on the bench, Man City away. He's currently flagged. He's going to be absolutely fine for that game, I'm sure. And then you've got Luton at home in game week 31 and pretty good fixtures afterwards. Obviously, long term, you can look to sell him. But I think given how good Arsenal defence is, I would still want him there. And just to cover off the other couple of bench positions, Garnacho, again, is on there for the bench boost later on. He's absolutely nailed for Man United at the moment. There are potentially issues with Man United players later on in the season, but I still think I would go with them. And when I say issues, it's around I'm thinking about the potential for rotation. So the FA Cup final is after game week 38. And obviously, Man United might lose to Coventry, right, and go out. But there's a good chance they get through to the final. So I don't think rotation in the double in 37 is a problem. But I was speaking to someone earlier, and they kind of mentioned that if, European places are done, and Man United have got nothing to play for, maybe they rotate in game week 38 away to Brighton. It's a possibility, but I don't think it's worth worrying about so much that I wouldn't put Garnacho on my wildcard draft ready for that bench boost later on. And then I've also got Onana for the same reason, right? So if Petrovic misses out, you've got Onana as a backup who's absolutely nailed. And then you've got that Chelsea and Man United goalkeeper combination ready for the bench boost in game week 37. It doesn't have to be Onana. You could go for someone else that's likely to double in 37, but you're looking at Brighton. I just wouldn't go near their goalkeepers. Spurs, you could go for Vicario. But there's probably going to be 3 outfield Spurs players you want. Like if Richarlison keeps his place at that number 9, he's going to be an option later on as well. Who else is going to be doubling that week? Man City, so potentially Ederson you could go for instead. And obviously you wouldn't go for a Newcastle goalkeeper because Nick Pope might be back at that point. So your options really, if you're looking ahead to that bench boost in 37, are Petrovic plus one of Onana or Ederson. Take your pick. I guess with Ederson, you haven't got that worry about rotation with the defenders. But who knows, right? European matches could be done and Ortega could come in. A lot of it's up in the air. And I think that's one of the... I think wildcard in 30 or 31 and free hit 34 is a really good strategy. The biggest downside is having to make all these bench boost decisions now, and it could backfire and result in loads of transfers later on. Hopefully not, but that is one of the problems. So I think I would go for Onana over Ederson, but it's pretty close. So I've already mentioned Garnacho. Outside of him, I think the rest of the midfield pretty much picks itself. So I've gone for Palmer, Salah, Son and Saka. If you've got more money than I do, or you've got a slightly different squad setup where you haven't spent so much money in the forward line, you could go for a different midfielder on the bench to Garnacho. Essentially, you want someone that's likely to double in game week 37. So you could look at Gross, for example, from Brighton. I don't think there's really too many other midfielders from Chelsea. You got Foden from Man City. You could go for Fernandes, Rashford from Man United, Anthony Gordon from Newcastle, or even Richarlison or Maddison from Spurs. But the way that I've set it up, I've only got 1.3 million in the bank. So for me, Garnacho is kind of perfect for this setup. With Salah, obviously good fixtures for Liverpool before that game week 34 double. Brighton at home this week. I still think, and I said this, I can't remember when I said it, maybe last week or something, for the game week 29 videos, that Salah is going to be somewhat of a differential this week. People aren't stupid. They're going to bring him in. Of course they are. But his ownership is going to be much lower than it will be in game week 31. So I like getting him in straight away, even if you're free hitting in 34. Because later on, if you want to go all in with 15 double game week players for the bench boost, you're going to sell Salah anyway because he's not going to double, and that unlocks a lot of money to make the other upgrades that you might need. Son, great fixture this week, great fixtures before that blank in game week 34, and then 2 double game weeks afterwards. So if you're free hitting, it makes sense to have him. Saka's not necessarily ideal this week, but I like the 3 fixtures afterwards. And similar to Salah, you can just sell him later on. And with Palmer, I've already spoken about the Chelsea fixtures. They're great before 34. They got 2 doubles afterwards. He just makes so much sense. He's so cheap on penalties, continues to be nailed. I don't think Sterling is going to be taking any more Chelsea penalties anytime soon either. Did you watch him against Leicester? Not great. Palmer is going to have to take penalties. He's much better. So yeah, like I said, almost picks itself. I can't really, I'm not on Wildcard 30, so maybe I haven't thought about it as much as other people, but I just can't really think of any other midfielders you'd want to go for instead of those 4 main ones that are in the 11. For sure, you could go for someone else instead of Garnacho, but even if you went for like a Foden, does it really matter playing Foden over Saka in game week 30? I think with Saka having penalties, probably not. And then Saka's the better option afterwards anyway. So I don't know, maybe I'm missing something. Let me know in the comments below if there's a different midfielder you're looking at. But for this specific chip strategy, free hit 34, bench boost 37, I think that looks pretty good. So I think for anyone wildcarding this week, no matter which other chips they might have to use before the end of the season, 2 of the 3 forwards on pretty much every draft are going to be the same. And that is Erling Haaland, who pretty much never needs any discussion as to why he's in someone's squad. And then Darwin Nunez as well. Now, I've already mentioned that Darwin Nunez is on 8 yellow cards. So if he gets 2 more over the next 4 matches, he will be suspended for 2 games, which is not ideal. But I think if I was wildcarding this week, I would definitely take the risk given how good Liverpool's fixtures are. And if he does get suspended and he misses 1 or both of the games in double game week 34, on this strategy, it doesn't matter because you're going to free hit anyway. So I think I would definitely have him. With Haaland, most of the season when he's fit, he's a no-brainer. And for me, I think he's a no-brainer on Wildcard 30 as well. I know some people are worried about his minutes being reduced, possible rotation soon because of Champions League. But I think for everything we've seen so far with him at Man City, that's just not worth worrying about because he's never been rested in the Premier League until the title was already over. Once the Premier League was won last year and the Champions League was obviously still on for Man City, yeah, he got rotated. But before that, it never happened apart from when he was injured. So if he's fit, I think he's got to be in our teams. Like, it's Luton at home in 33. Even Villa at home in 31 and Palace away in 32 are not that bad. Also, keep in mind, after 34, you've got Forest away, Wolves at home in 36, and then a double in 37, and West Ham at home in 38. If that title race is still open, I reckon Haaland will probably start all of those games, unless he's got some kind of a knock. And so I think you'll want him, right? Especially when he's got a double game week later on. So there maybe is some discussion about dropping him if you think his minutes are going to be kind of low enough, or maybe he won't start against Luton. But I'm just not sure I'd be confident enough in predicting that. So Haaland and Darwin will be on the draft. The other player I've gone for is Isak. I think you've got to drop Watkins. Because even if you wanted him for Bournemouth at home in 34, you could just put him back in on the free hit. I think Man City away and Arsenal away, 2 tough games for Villa. And long-term no doubles. Whereas Isak will double with Newcastle, probably in game week 37. The key worry I always have with Isak is his injuries, right? We know he's going to play when fit, because Callum Wilson is currently injured. It's just about how many games Isak can play. The good thing is, for FPL, Newcastle are out of all competitions. Am I right? Yeah, they're knocked out of the FA Cup. They're not in Europe anymore. And obviously the Carabao Cup's already been done. So they've only got games pretty much every single week. Apart from the double in 37 would obviously be 2 games quickly back-to-back. And game week 30, they're playing on Saturday. And game week 31, they're playing on Tuesday. So there is potential issue here where he could get benched or have reduced minutes. But outside of that, I think he'll be fine as long as he's not got a knock. And Newcastle's fixtures are really good. So essentially, you get West Ham at home, Everton at home, Fulham away, and Spurs at home before the double. Before you free hit in 34. So 3 home games in 4 game weeks. And then afterwards for Newcastle, it's Sheffield United at home, Burnley away, double game week, Brentford away. If he stays fit, he's great. He's on penalties. And again, I think that's a risk worth taking. You could drop one of Isak or Darwin to someone cheaper and spread that money elsewhere. But I quite like that setup. The biggest concern I have is the defence. right? Petrovic, Gusto, Lascelles, Van Heck. I don't know. It doesn't inspire me, right? It doesn't give me a huge amount of confidence. But I also know if they do keep their place, they're going to be really good, cheap options. And obviously, there is potential issues down the line with Bench Boost 37. You're quite far away from that. There are transfers in between, okay? Essentially, all your transfers are going to be used to make sure that bench boost is decent. Okay, if you get injuries before 34, fair enough, it might be different. But up until 34 and beyond, you know, all you're really worrying is about that bench boost in Game Week 37. So I think this team is pretty well set up, and it gives you a bit of flexibility before you free hit in 34. Like if you get to 33 and everything looks great, then all you're doing is making a transfer ready for after Game Week 34, because obviously you can't roll a transfer into a free hit. Anyway, that's the draft for free hit 34, bench boost 37. Let's look at some wildcards if you don't have your free hit. So this draft is for someone that wants to wildcard in Game Week 30, doesn't have their free hit, and is looking to bench boost in Game Week 37. Now, some people might say, why would you bench boost so late if you're wildcarding now and you don't have your free hit? Wouldn't it make more sense to go in Game Week 34? And there is definitely merit to doing that. One of the key teams to think about is Spurs, because they have good fixtures before Game Week 34. And remember, Spurs are going to blank that week. And they got good fixtures afterwards, plus 2 double game weeks. So if you bench boost in 34, you're going to have no Spurs players in that team because they got no fixture. And then you're going to have to buy them back afterwards, which might not be an issue. It all depends on how many spare transfers you're going to have with the draft that you come up with. With a bench boost in 37, you can just bench your Spurs players in 34, try and get as many double game week players as possible in the 11, and then look to focus on your bench players ahead of Game Week 37. Neither strategy is necessarily perfect. It really comes down to your own preferences. So I'm not going to go through this draft bit by bit because a lot of the players I've already spoken about. I'll just go through the differences. So on the bench in goal, I've got Raya instead of Onana. That should be pretty obvious. Raya is going to double in Game Week 34, so he's just ready for that game week. And obviously you've got Petrovic as well, ready for the double in 37. And obviously Ray would be one of your transfers ahead of Game Week 37 for the bench boost. I've gone for Van Dijk instead of Lascelles in defence. That's to get your 3 Liverpool players ready for the good fixtures before 34, and obviously they double in Game Week 34 as well. Van Dijk is the only defender I'd be confident of when it comes to the minutes. Like Bradley is fine very short term, but obviously when Trent is back, that's going to be a problem. And I would not trust any of Robertson, Gomez, Simicast, Kanate, Kwanzaa, etc. Van Dijk is the only one I would say right now will play every game between now and that double in 34. The problem is, at least with my team value, to fund that Van Dijk move, I've gone for Eze instead of Saka. Now, Eze will double in 34. 2 home games, West Ham and Newcastle, not bad. It's Forest away this week. It's Bournemouth away in Game Week 31. You could even bench him for the tougher fixtures in 32 and 33 because Sarabia is on the bench as an enabler. And if we just quickly check Wolves fixtures, in 32 it's West Ham at home, and in 33 it's Forest away. So you could bench Eze and play Sarabia instead. So that's not a huge issue. The problem is I've got Eze instead of Saka, and Arsenal have got good fixtures after this week, and they also double in 34. But it's the only way I could afford Van Dijk. Now, one of the moves you could make is, of course, Son out for Saka in Game Week 34, or even before that if you wanted to. But then you're losing a player you know you're going to want back. So I got to be honest, once I put this draft together and started thinking about that, I'm not sure necessarily about Bench Boost 37 if you don't have your free hit. Because being able to free hit in 34 is quite a big advantage for anyone that's wildcarding right now. But that is the way to get Saka in, is to sell Son and then get him back. So with this draft as it stands before transfers, you've got Raya, Sarabia, Gabriel, Darwin, Solanke, Salah, Eze, and Van Dijk. I don't know why I counted backwards. So 8 double game week players, and then possibly Son to Saka is one more. And then after that, you're just focusing your transfers on getting those bench boost players. So I don't think it's... I definitely don't think it's a terrible strategy by any means. I just don't know how that transition to bench boost 37 is going to work. And having to sell Son when you know you're going to want him back is also... I don't know, it's just not something I quite... I mean, you could get rid of Van Dijk and just go for a cheaper defender. But I think going into a Liverpool double game week without 3 players from that team. I just don't like that. So it's a tricky one. The only other player that's different is I've got Solanke instead of Isak. That's self-explanatory, right? Bournemouth are going to double in 34. They got good fixtures beforehand. You can just look to get Isak in later. So that's the Bench Boost 37 draft. Let's take a quick look at the Bench Boost 34 one. So again, this draft is for someone that wants to wildcard in Game Week 30, doesn't have their free hit, but this time is looking to bench boost in Game Week 34 instead of 37. There's actually only 2 players different to the last draft I spoke about. So instead of Petrovic in goal, I've got Jordan Pickford because Everton are going to double in Game Week 34. They got Forest at home and Liverpool at home. And instead of Van Heck on the bench, I've gone for Tarkowski, again, from Everton. You could go for Mikolenko. You could just go for a Wolves defender instead, like Ait-Nouri. But either way, those 2 players are in because they double in Game Week 34. And now I'm thinking about this kind of out loud as I'm recording. And look, there might be a better draft that you can come up with, right? I'm recording this not long after we've had the Game Week 34 fixtures confirmed. But if it's only 2 players different, surely it's better to just get the bench boost out of the way sooner rather than later. Obviously, if you got the free hit as well, different conversation, right? You can set things up a little bit better. But maybe in this case, if you've only got the bench boost and wildcard, it might just be good to get it done in 34 and then just worry about getting out an 11 in Game Week 37 instead. For this draft, you definitely sell your Spurs players in 34. So Son would go to Saka, and Udogie could just go to a different defender that's doubling in Game Week 34. Maybe you even put another Arsenal one on there. And then after 34, you're just focusing all your transfers on double Game Week 37. So I actually quite like this. I don't think not having Petrovic is a huge issue because you've got Gusto anyway from Chelsea. You've still got Raya on the bench. I think that looks pretty good. So I need to think about it a bit more. We've got a long time until the Game Week 30 deadline still. But I think if I was wildcarding this week with no free hit, I'd probably side more towards bench boosting in 34. But I think if you've got your free hit, it makes more sense to free hit 34 rather than 37. But if I keep talking about this, it's just going to get more complicated. So if you enjoy this video, make sure to give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Rate 5 stars if you listen on podcast. Loads more normal content like transfer tips, game week preview, team selection to come before the deadline. So don't panic if I haven't answered your question. There's plenty of time for that. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.